I bring the meeting to order. Okay, does everyone have a copy of the minutes?
Yeah.
Any corrections or deletions or?
I read them, they seem to be okay.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to accept them as received.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I'll make that unanimous. All right, the superintendent's phase 6 update.
I'll give you the phase 6 update first. Right now, we're just about finished with the low pressure portion of sewer on 44. Just about 100 feet left to go from the opposite side of the street from Metro 4 to get to the last two of the patios. Then low pressure work on Church Street, which is low pressure in about probably another 800 feet. Then gravity left on contract 3 is that street, I think it's Adam Lane up on Hill Street, which goes into Braymore Woods subdivision, but it's the north part of Hill Street has to be done from Dean. The piece that goes into, will enter into John Melvin's condo project, which exits into Paramount Drive's pump station from basically Joe's Gas all the way down to that low point, from that low point to the high point. That's all the pipe work.
So, Chris, I want to make sure I understand this. I know the pump station was originally planned for right there at the condo.
Yeah.
And now it's not going to be at the condo.
No.
And it was also planned to have it across the street from River Road or River Street.
That's
sorry.
Separate part. This is somehow we're talking about.
But that wouldn't be there either. The one that was originally planned right across the street from the condo.
No, these condos are on Hill Street. These aren't the apartments.
Oh, okay, sorry, I'm at the apartment.
These are the condos on Hill Street that was Mike and Tosh's Bella Estates project.
Okay.
But John and Frank have taken over.
Okay.
So that's all the line work that's left to be done on contract 3. Contract 2, all the line work's done, all the paving is done, except top coating on a portion of Judson Street, which is under the highways direction now. We paid them money to do it, and they're going to do it in the spring. Contract 2, the pump stations are both in, they're mostly wired. The prefab, the buildings are being built off-site and then brought in panelized, and so they brought in the 4 walls for the one of the Judson Street by Alexander Drive Station. They're bringing in the other walls on Tuesday because they can't work on the highway now because they can't work the day before, the day after holiday. So today they finished up what they could, and they'll come back there Wednesday and finish up the rest of it. So those 2 pump stations are going to be framed and wired shortly. Considering we only did the changeover a few weeks ago, they jumped right on it. They're going to start on the Dean Street pump station and do the same. That well's all in and all piped, and the slab's all poured, so you can start building that building and bring it pump into it. Joe Aruda's pump station is loam seeded, hydro seeded, which Joey actually did for us and sent me to build it. So that's pretty much buttoned up and ready to go, get powered up. Contracts 4 and 5, as you probably get emails in the last day or so. Those were draft designed and submitted to conservation for Suzanne Drive, River Street, and Church Street. And they have 2 pump stations, one over on River Drive or River Road, whatever it is, and one over on Suzanne Drive. So
that's the one I was
is
questioning, Chris. I'm sorry, I just want
that originally had a pump station in front of John's apartments
on Church Street, and that's out.
And that's out.
And there was one across the street too originally.
They never really designed anything across the street yet because they never.
But they were talking about that, right?
Yeah, they never put the 2 packages together way back when they designed contract 4, so that portion was left out. So now they're proposing a very deep cut pump station
On Riverbank.
on the River Road.
River Street.
River Street.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be a very expensive install. I mean, they're down.
My question is this. I'm sorry, Chris. My question is, if they go over, I was told it was Riverbank, but whatever, River Road, River Street. So it's going to be very deep, and it's effectively replacing what was originally 2 stations?
Yes.
One across from the condos and the other one right on the corner of Church and River or whatever?
The other one would have been probably halfway down River Brook
So
Road.
is the one station, in your opinion, that's gonna go back, the deep one that's replacing the two, is that gonna cover the condos? Is that gonna be sufficient?
The apartments?
Yeah, apartments.
I haven't looked at the design calcs yet, I mean, they just have draft plans right now.
Yeah, I think that's the question I have, Chris.
I mean, I mean, we're paying them to design it to accommodate that and to accommodate what could be future, which would be Park Place, Gatsby Drive, and past, there's portions of Raynham past the railroad tracks. So I imagine they take that into consideration, I can ask them, but.
I would like to be more comfortable with the fact that those apartments are gonna be covered by one station that's, I understand gonna be very deep, but place of the two that were originally
Yeah,
planned.
I mean, it may turn out that you're not saving any money by doing one station. So I know Tony was from Selco and Joe were quoting me some pretty high numbers to do that work. I mean,
That's my question, that's what
basically,
worries me.
you're gonna have to, how Walmart spent a couple $100,000 dewatering just to do that one wet well. This is a situation you're gonna have to dewater the entire street and depress a river.
I'm really concerned
And
about
you're
that.
basically, the pumps, the gravity main is at sea level, just about, it's maybe a foot above sea level, so it's 10
And
feet
why don't
below
we
the river.
set up a meeting with Ty and Bond and get that issue straightened out?
We already talked about it, and let's start putting numbers on it to see where it ends up. Because it's gonna be a tough thing to build.
That's what I'm worried about.
But to add on to that, that's in the permitting phase. Along the same lines of accommodating the apartments, Park Place, those people, they want to come in here at our next meeting at Gatsby Drive in that area to see if we can start putting numbers together to see if it's cost effective to cross the railroad bridge or under the swamp and get them. They do have a lot of units, so you have high numbers there, which is a good thing, because I mean, this church and this church, Suzanne Drive, River Brook, you don't have high numbers there, and you have a very expensive job. So I mean, the betterments there are probably going to be in excess of $10,000 for the rough numbers, so we can calculate it. So it may be practical to go and get Gatsby and Park Place, because they're technically supposedly one-bedroom units, but they're really using as two. And if you divide them all evenly, they have at least 96 units in Park Place alone. And Gatsby Drive probably has over 50. And then John's Apartments, I think there's two buildings, there's only a couple houses on the other side of the tracks. So they wanted to come in tonight. I asked them to hold off a month so I could give you a heads up on it first. And do some preliminary examination of sewer cost on that. We had old numbers, and I could see if I could put something together and put together the units, or even back it in on a betterment amount and take a betterment, how many units, and then put a number that would be available to spend based on a certain betterment, type of thing. The taking plans, meeting with a surveyor next week to start the taking plans on River Street and on Suzanne Drive. I tried to get in touch with the people that own the properties. I haven't had any luck with them. There's a question on the property line on whose property one of the pump stations is on. So we're gonna pin down the property line. So we're gonna start on the taking plans. We actually won't be able to get them until May's town meeting. And that's about it as far as the update on the project right now. The only other thing I got was the retained earnings. I got a certified amount from Dave Graff, and he does it a little different than the way the other accountants do it. And so he had about a little over $2.5 million. Where the town itself has like $1 million in their free cash. And they have that. But that doesn't, there's some encumbrances he doesn't have taken out of that. So it's really, he didn't take out the encumbrance of the, the money that was put together to pay the betterment debt came out of here for the
580,000?
580,000.
So it's listed as being retained earnings.
It's listed, so that was his basically camera shot on July 1st of what was in the bank account. But he doesn't do it the way it's normally done, which Diane deserved from the DOR, which I've done it with her in the past. They didn't take into account, which maybe she wasn't aware of it, but a couple of encumbrances, one the 582 to pay for the, shortness in the retained earnings, retained earnings account. The betterment account, and there was some money put towards our expense account as well. And we got indirect costs to pay through that as well. So last time I gave you a number of about 1.7, 1.8, it's a more accurate number.
Does this also reflect the budget for the,
Yeah, no,
Oh, it doesn't.
no, it doesn't reflect the budget or the.
so the budget's not
582.
deducted out of this either?
No.
Well, the budget gets deducted as the year goes on.
I know that, but-
It doesn't as the year goes
But
on.
what I'm saying is we appropriated the money at town meeting, and it's not deducted from this 2.6.
Yeah, that's not how it's done. The budget's based on projected.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is the amount that we have budgeted is not deducted from this 2.6. I know it gets taken out as we use it, but we have to do
I think they didn't put the amount that was appropriated in, nor the expenses anticipated to have a net effect of an increase or decrease.
Yeah.
So-
So what that really translates to for the person that's not involved in how this revolves is that retained earnings is a buildup which is drawn down over the period of the year. So it looks very high, but it's built up and then drawn down as the year goes on. So it's not.
But it's also built back up by.
It is,
So
yeah,
it's
it is.
built, they don't have.
But the
projected
retained earnings on his
So-
report must mean to us, and it should mean to us. And if it isn't, then he needs to adjust it and explain it. It means that on the 30th of June, the end of the fiscal year, we had retained earnings of $2.5 million according to this. But it wasn't, because we know they took the $500,000 out.
Mhm.
So this is overstated by that $252,000. It has nothing to do with possible additional retained earnings that we're getting in the fiscal year we're in right now. That's a snapshot. That is not a moving document. It's not like a P&L. It's more like a balance sheet, and that's the number at that point in time. That number should go up. Actually, should be reduced by the 520 and go up by any retained earnings we're able to establish in this fiscal year.
So any revenues, we just sent out sewer bills, which we
Yeah.
all already got, and that's all gonna come in. But
Yeah.
what it is, it's what it's supposed to do is his snapshot on July 1st is supposed to say, okay, this is the number you can appropriate. You cannot exceed this number in any of your appropriations throughout the year. What it really should be to me is 1.8, so that's the way it's been done, because there's money already encumbered.
Right.
Along with the superintendent's report, the work that's being done on Locust Street, are they completed with that?
They backed up all the pavement, they're out there now. I don't know if they're totally finished, but they've gotten all the way to the end of Locust. They're
No, I'm talking about the private contractor that's out there.
Is the sewer done?
Yeah.
what private contract? You mean for the pavement work?
No,
Oh, that Locust Street.
yeah.
No, he's run into ledge and he's had a real tough time out there, and he didn't send his A-team out. I mean, the guys he had out there at first were landscapers.
Yeah.
So he's finally got a guy that knows what he's doing, but he's run into ledge, so he's had to hire a hammer, and it's very expensive. So what he's gonna do is hammer his trench. He's got a few hundred feet to go, so he's gonna hammer his trench, do all the hammering first, and backfill it at night, and then go back and dig it all back up and lay his pipe.
Are we having inspections out there?
Yeah.
All right. Do we have a licensed drain layer out there?
Yeah.
Okay. They came here and got a license?
Yep.
All right. Anything else on the superintendent's report?
No, 44 seems to be going fine. That they're on both sides of the street. You know, it's. Can you kind of explain that to me, Chris? That's low pressure on both sides.
That's low pressure, which I mean, I hope no big users come. It's only a 2-inch line. You know, it's a white PVC 2-inch
Yeah.
line.
Well, I've physically seen
So there
the
wasn't.
pipe going in.
At first, they had a crossing. They had on both sides of the street, the full length from Hill down to Metro Ford.
Yeah.
And those last few buildings. It didn't go down to the open land, which is still there.
Before the river.
Before the river, some of the land on the right is around Furrows, east past Metro Ford.
Yeah.
But he can get it off Church. Some of it on the left was the estate of Jerry Kelleher, and then the video extra. Or I think John actually grew up in the area. But so they stopped. There's a couple small car dealers across from Metro Ford. That's where they stopped on the one side. Metro Ford, we had to run it down longer than the plan had said, actually, on both things, because the plan didn't even have the last 2 houses on it. For some reason. Metro Ford, their septic's on their far side. So we've had to run it a little longer. So that's a 2-inch main where everyone along the route gets what looks like a water tap. It's an 1.5-inch line that goes out with a check valve and like a shut-off, just like a water shut-off.
Mm-hmm.
And then they buy their pump, put it at their building. They each have to buy, grind a pump and put it at their building, whatever their use is, and then pump it through that line. Right now, there's a lot of low uses, or there's a couple of vacant buildings. If we do get some big uses, I don't know how that's going to handle it, or if it will. There's 2 inches of that.
I do have another question, and it has to do with off of Church Street behind the dealership. There's a cul-de-sac.
Brookside Circle, yeah.
That is, and I know what it looks like. It looks like it's an approved street, but an unfinished, unaccepted street.
Yeah, that was an approved subdivision done by the Todd Nikos GDR Corporation years ago.
My understanding is that the town took the bond.
Yeah, it's not enough to.
$50,000, I think.
Oh, no, well,
Yes.
see, the sewer stopped because it wasn't an accepted street,
Right.
right? But the town has the bond. They don't have enough money to make it a finished street. What would it take to put that, is it 1.5 or 2-inch line, down to the cul-de-sac so those 4 units could be bedded at the same time? And it'd be their responsibility to get their, grinder pump or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean,
To use it.
I guess you could go, we've probably done private road, but I could put a number on it just off South Coast.
Is it a private road?
It is.
Yeah,
The town took the bond.
right.
There's a technicality there, John. It isn't private if the town takes the bond and doesn't complete it. We have not accepted the road, no question about
But
that.
the town has taken the bond to complete.
But they never finished the
planning
road.
board's taken the
So
bond.
from that standpoint, it's a
What's-
town,
what's
we
the-
plow it
What's the bond for?
to finish it.
When you,
Finish
the
when you
road.
do a subdivision road, you get to a certain point, which they were at binder at one point, and probably in decent shape 15 years ago when they did it, 20 years. Now it's just gravel, but, because all the pavement is just pulverized. But, when you do a subdivision, you bring it up to a certain level, generally bind, of course, and then you go in and want to release all your lots for sale. So you have to put up some surety in form of a performance bond. That's how the subdivision control law works. So they come in and want to release their lots. We, at the time, send someone out and do an estimate. We do a much more aggressive estimate now than the planning board used to. And they put up a number and post that number in either a passbook or surety. Bond or a tripartite agreement, but then supposedly, that money is supposed to be enough to finish that road if they jump ship or fail to perform.
At that date.
Yeah, but, I mean, we have the same situation like Paddock Road, had a $15,000 bond. I mean, so you have, a lot of the older roads had bonds, but it's not worth fixing, not worth, you know, even though you took the bond, you're not gonna complete the road. And that's happened in most towns around here back in the 80s. So there's a bond that's get taken by the planning board that's sitting there. The town, to accept the road, would have to go to town meeting and have a town vote and vote to accept the road. That hasn't been done. In fact, that hasn't been done on most every road in Raynham, for goodness sake. I mean, the roads that we're putting in sewer right now, none of them have ever been taken at any kind of town meeting. Typically, a town back in the 50s would take the town map and vote to accept every road on the map. Raynham, to the best of my knowledge, and a few competent surveyors that I deal with, that's never been done. So most roads haven't been technically accepted by the town, including Locust, Jefferson, and Water. But
It's kind of hard.
that was before
You're right.
subdivision control.
You're right, but there's a grandfather clause in most of the things, and the town said, yes, we own the road. But you're right with the way the subdivision law. The only reason I ask is that the town plows that, and the town gets taxes, because people have facilities that they, not all the lots are occupied, but they have facilities down there. I was just curious as to how much would it cost
You
to do
just
that.
take Selco's numbers. I mean, they're getting paid based on how much pipe they put in. There's a certain rate for the pipe. There's a certain rate for their services. So you just figure out the length of the pipe and however many services there are, and come up with a number, just pull it off. Selco's bid sheet.
Excuse me, my understanding with regard to this issue, Joe, was that whatever the cost estimate was for this private road and the 3 or 4 or 5 organizations that are on it, that they understand that they would be on the hook to pay for that. So, you know, so if Selco says X amount of money and they decide they want to pay X amount of money, it's fine.
Yeah, but
do
if
I
we-
get that wrong?
My suggestion before was that if they, now would be the time to approach Selco. If
Exactly.
those people would
Yes,
agree to
precisely.
chip in and they get a number from Selco, the one thing is it's, with us, their prevailing wage for the private job, their numbers might be a
It's a
little.
lot less money to do it now with Selco there
Yeah.
than if they go back after the fact and Selco's left town.
If they go
know
to
that.
Selco, not if we go to Selco.
That's
That's correct, if they go. And it's, Joe, excuse me.
If we put it in there, Joe, Dick, they're gonna get vetted anyways.
Not if they finance it.
No, not if they
No,
finance.
I realize that.
And they understand from what I've
They
heard.
get charged a connection fee.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but they pay for the,
They're
they
gonna
pay
pay it
for the
anyways.
install, not a betterment. And they know that.
yeah,
They
if they pay
recognize-
for themselves, that's their
They've been
betterment
told
charge.
Yeah, they've been told that,
Okay.
they understand it.
Okay.
And they understand that if they deal with Selco now, as Chris has just said, they're way ahead of the curve, because if they go after the fact, you know, the game is left town.
Yeah. Mobilization only, yeah, that's
Yeah.
okay.
I'm just curious, you know, it is when the town takes a bond, I think that the town takes an obligation to make sure that street's finished. And we don't always do it, and I agree with you, Chris, but the fact is that you can't go back to the original person because you took the bond.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the exact status of it. I'm assuming that, you know, I haven't asked the planning board if we took the bond. If we did, it was probably before my time.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it's been a while, no question
How
about it.
long's it been?
Well, I've known the town goes for 20 years there. And I was doing work with them.
So you're saying the planning board's had the bond for over 20 years?
No, I'm saying they built the road. The road's been there over 20 years because I've been doing jobs with the Todd Nikos as excavating contractors and road builders back in 1994.
How long has the planning board had the bond?
They probably took the bond when they did the subdivision back in 91 or 90, whenever they did it, or could even have been the 80s. And they probably took it after that because they got in some trouble. And they had some, you know, when the crunch hit in '89, they took a big hit from a lot of customers that they built what's for. And I know they had a lot of trouble, and that's probably why they lost the rest of the lots.
But I mean, if the planning board took over the bond, do you know when they took that bond?
No,
So we've had it for quite a while.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember taking it. Could have been a night I wasn't there, but I don't
No,
remember taking it.
I was just, I know the number of ways of doing it. It just seemed to me that there's a street that the town plows, gets their taxes on it, and they took the bond, and now we stop in the sewer at one spot because we say it's not an accepted street. Yes, it's not accepted, because nobody ever petitioned for the acceptance, because they never finished the road.
Yeah, but I think finishing the road and sewering are the two separate issues. They're really not the same issue.
No, I realize that, but I mean, somebody on the street asked me a question.
I know, and they asked me too.
So,
And the
you know.
bottom line is, sewering it is one issue. Whether or not that bond, which goes way back to when they were gonna pave it, is, you know, that's a whole separate
You
issue.
could probably include it in sewer it and give betterments, because they're property owners. That's running the utility, same as running a water line. And you could.
The betterment goes to the property,
Yeah. you could
and it
do that.
stays there until it's paid, so.
But you're right, the bond had to do as a roadway bond.
That's
It's
absolutely.
not a utility bond.
I
But
understand that.
it's less expensive for us if they do it themselves.
It's less
Yeah,
expensive
Because
for
if we do
them.
it, then 75% of the cost
That's
is
right,
borne
it's paid by
the taxpayer.
taxation, that's right.
Yeah.
So if they want it done, then,
It would make more sense for them to
right.
engage in the contractor to come in and just do it.
Absolutely.
Good, fine.
Have they had any contact with you, Chris?
No.
They have with you?
Yep.
All right, you want to give them a little buzz?
No, I think, oh, you mean, you get back, they understand where we are right
Okay,
now.
all right.
This is,
But do they understand that they can get together with
Yes,
cell
they
phone?
understand.
Okay, fine, then
They
it's
should
up to
ask,
them.
they should ask the town Nichols, they don't leave, but right there on the end of the
Yeah.
road.
No, they
do
understand
that
that.
for a living.
Yeah, all right.
it's no question.
Anything else on your update?
No,
All right, can we get into the invoices?
just sign bond invoices. Phase 6 contracts, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Chris, are we going to be able to better Locust and Judson by the end of the year?
The dates they're giving me now for completion are May 1st and May 1st for contract 2, and May 30th for contract 3.
That's because of the extension we gave them for the houses on the pump stations?
Yeah.
So we're not gonna better this December?
They don't believe so. But you may have to plan. We still may. We're putting together the list, the assessors list, the information for how many applications are ready to put in. The so they have to do, they couldn't start their wiring until we did the change orders. Now you're building all these walls, and you're gonna have to move all your wiring onto the walls and a lot of things. So they're moving along. I mean, they have a new electrical contractor. We're having a lot of difficulty with the other guy, and
Yeah, I saw him working on Judson Street.
we have a new contractor. Moving along quickly, actually. Pretty confident, and appears to be, and so, and these buildings, I mean, they're sheds, they don't take long to build. They'll bring in the other 4 walls next week to the other one, and you just throw the trusses up and slap plywood and throw a roof on it.
All right.
And they gotta put the windows and doors, and it's not as complicated without the generator inside. And what we may do, not till the future, I'm thinking, is run an extension off the back, because now you got a generator and control panel that's sitting out there to the left.
Yeah.
And run an extension and a roof and leave the one side open, use overhang over the stuff so for the snow.
Yeah, protected from the
Yeah.
weather.
And leave the one side open, so you'll have one big wall, which is your vent. And you won't need the venting and all that. All you have to do is take your exhaust and put an elbow on it, turn it, and put an extension on it, get it out of the room. And we looked at that the other day. But they may be done. You know, we're gonna kind of prepare as if they're gonna be done. But, right now, his change order, he's not contractually obliged to finish by January 1st.
No, I realize that. When he asked for the change order, they asked for the extension of time. We knew, everybody figured that it could be done, but they wanted to protect themselves. So I understand.
How do we stand budget-wise with the construction?
What do you mean, overall?
Yes, overall. Are we on target?
Yeah, we're close. I mean, we're close to, you know, with the change order and everything,
Mhm.
we're close. I mean, we know what the numbers are gonna come in at. Contract 2, you know, you're not gonna really have any more police details, maybe a few days, for a couple of things, but not much. Inspection time, you're limited to, you probably don't have more than 40 to 60 hours left of inspection time. On the pump stations, you got not to exceed flat number for the pump station and the buildings. So we know what the numbers are. It just matter, you know, I could come pretty close to putting a better number on it right now. I've calculated some of it, but even with it not being done, because you know what the number's going to be. The only, is we still have a lot of money in Ty and Bond's contract, even though there's nothing for them to do. There hasn't been anything for them to do on contract 2 for months, because all the pipe work's done, everything's done. And out of the 90,000, of course, there's 70,000 left over, and there's nothing to do. We're still getting bills, but there's really nothing to do on the contract, so.
Well, they've
Don't
cut back
pay
on- Excuse me, they've cut back on their bills, so I've seen the.
Yeah, some of them, but I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing left to do on the job, so
Well, that's why
that
they
could be a
cut back on it.
reduction. So maybe you should talk to them about maybe re-looking at what the proposal was and saying, okay, we don't have anything to do, and call it a day on that.
I'll get in touch with them.
And it's the same on contract 3, there isn't really.
Did you
much
attend the
left.
last progress meeting?
No, I appointed.
That would be a good opportunity to talk to them,
Yeah.
if you attended the progress
Yeah.
meetings.
I have a couple
I
of,
appointed for this like about 6 months in advance, and the progress meeting was moved up a day
Uh,
at the last minute.
do you have prepared for us a copy of the monthly budget for our review?
The monthly budget,
Yeah.
we don't really have a monthly budget, we have a yearly budget.
Well, we also operate on a monthly basis where we have money coming in and where we're spending money. You know, we've asked for that on several
Those are
occasions.
the reports from David Graff. Yeah, he hasn't,
And what about the monthly payroll? Do you have a report for us to review?
I can give you weekly payrolls, yeah.
Okay.
I can email it all to
Do
you.
we still have a construction trailer on site?
No,
Did we ever have a construction trailer?
I'm not sure. There was a trailer at a Ruder's, but they're not at a Ruder's anymore.
Well, I've never seen the trailer at a Ruder's.
Yeah,
Yeah. How come we don't have one?
I mean, Salco's a contractor, that's up to them, I mean,
No,
we
it's not
were-
up to them. I asked you 18 months ago if we had a construction trailer, you said we did.
I don't know if I said we did, or I'm not sure.
No, you definitely said we did. And,
So.
well, I'm just bringing that out, that's all. A lot of these people here have been wanting some questions answered, and that's all part of the questions. It's been almost 2 years when we've been trying to get a breakdown of the budget on a monthly basis and a review of the employees' monthly payroll. It's been over 2 years that we've requested that on several occasions, and we still haven't got it. These are just some of the issues. And about the only issues that I'm willing to go into right now. But that's just for everybody's knowledge. So, does anybody have any more questions for the superintendent, or any old business or new business? Does anybody out there have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Gordon Luciano, Darrington Drive. A couple things. First of all, the retained earnings. I can't emphasize enough, and I'm sure you take it as an extremely important document. It comes out once a year. It's sort of, in a sense, similar to how the free cash certification works for the town and how important we rely on that number. If you've got a $500,000 error here, I would recommend that the board reach out to the town accountant to possibly take a look at filing an amended return to the Department of Revenue, because right now, in the eyes of the Department of Revenue and the town of Raynham, you have over $2,500,000 in undesignated earnings.
Okay,
And if
can I
it's
ask a
down to
question on
$1.8 million,
that? Yeah.
which based on the report tonight, that's a significant number.
Okay.
I don't make any judgment as to whether that's an appropriate number to carry or not. I'm only saying that the accuracy of the number is of vital importance.
You know, I'm not an accountant. Right up front, we have an accountant sitting right here. My question is, if this was made out on June 30th, were we voted at the town meeting to take out that $500,000 or $582? That doesn't happen until July 1st, correct?
Would depend when the vote is in which town meeting. If you're talking a fiscal year,
Right. But this
Carryover.
that was so that may be an explanation for this. Is that correct?
I think so.
Okay.
could be.
That's
Did you have a vote the previous year, though, that's not done off of this particular item?
no. It was that 580 was at the last town meeting.
For the annual town meeting for the
Yes,
next fiscal year?
Right. Yes. That's
Yeah.
when we took that. You of all people are very familiar with this because you were the first one to bring up the stabilization account. So we do appreciate that.
Okay. Yeah, I would just double check, where he's
We will.
applying that to make sure he applies
Yeah,
it.
we will.
What typically happens, Gordon, is and I don't know why it went this way this year, they take, as of June 30th, what your cash is minus what your encumbrance is. And that's how they come up with your free cash or your retained earnings. That's how it's done with the town. So it's your cash minus your appropriations. I don't know why, but I emailed him and said, this seems high. Did you not take out these appropriations? And he said, no, I didn't. They come out in FY15. But I've never, in 5 years I've been here, it's never been done this way because it's deceptive that you actually don't have $2.5 million available to spend. You really have like 1.7, 1.8.
Right.
And because that number is supposed to be what you have available to appropriate through FY15 on like emergencies, cars, anything like that. But
Well,
that should be probably,
Right.
that should be revisited.
Yeah, and actually of the 1.6 or 1.7, however it nets out, there's also a capital asset plan in place for longer term kinds of expenditures that are capital-wise. And I don't know, the last time that we reviewed that was probably close to a third of that number.
More than a third.
More than a third, actually. So.
How many
so
pumping
that-
stations do we have now?
About 30.
About 30. So I mean, part of our asset management plan is to take care of those pumping stations, on a periodic basis, As you're well aware of it, if you work with budgets like that, I mean, there are things that have to be done, maintenance that has to be done, parts that have to be replaced. And so we really are not sitting there with $1.8 million in our pocket. It's money that is put aside to take care of such items. So, we have to look at the future. We just can't work on today.
Clearly, putting a capital plan in place, part of that is a great idea. And I would compliment the board if that's the direction where you're going,
Yes,
because
we
that
established
really
that
is,
years ago. Yeah.
it's the area you do take capital items from. You shouldn't necessarily be hitting your operational account for capital items because.
Or running to special town meetings for.
All right,
for money.
you do it through the capital plan and you do it through that account, so
And
that's a
as
good
you're aware,
idea.
whenever we have a big money item, we do go through the capital planning committee. So, I mean.
Like a truck, you
Yeah.
see for the next. I have one other question, if I may.
Sure.
Mr. Chavell mentioned Friday meetings. What was the term for that? The Friday update meetings?
Progress.
Oh, progress meeting.
Progress meetings.
Yes.
Doesn't the superintendent schedule progress meetings? How did they get
No,
scheduled
we have a
on
consultant that sits down.
Well, it's a collaborative thing, though. It's not like it's dictated. It's always been, the attempt has always been to pull all the parties together, because you have Selco, you have you have Bruce, you have Chris, you've got Ty and Bond. So it's not a dictated thing. Obviously, it's something that you try to work through in a cooperative way. We've always done that, because it's the way we hold any meeting in town. So, if you're not available for the meeting and you're important, you try to negotiate a time which is reasonable. I would do that, you would do that, and so, sometimes you just can't do it. All other parties are available, so you go ahead.
Yeah, last time Robbie filled in for him.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But if
for
what
the
I'm
record, not
hearing,
dictate, Gordon, I just want to, the
if what
short
I'm-
answer is, the schedule is not like cast in concrete.
but if what I'm hearing tonight, and you said, by the way, the consultant schedules it or runs it, which consultant is that runs those?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Frank Cabral.
Frank Cabral.
We've hired him as a consultant for the.
Just for the progress meeting.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
For the
record,
construction,
this
for the
is-
construction period only.
If this is directed at me missing meetings,
No?
if that was what
Go
the
ahead.
direction was,
Make your point.
I gave Frank my vacation schedule at the beginning of the summer. He moved both meetings into my vacation. And my court-ordered time with my children was 9 o'clock in the summer on Friday until 9 o'clock on Monday morning. And so they'll be paying 9 o'clock on Friday. So
Well, my
if that's
response-
directed at me missing some of the meetings,
My
and
response to
I
that-
still canceled, put the kids off on a lot and went for the Friday meetings, but that's what happened. Because I've heard talk of I miss these meetings, and that's what missed.
And I take that, as presented, and my response to that would be, in order to really gauge that, we'd have to have the other perspective. That's your perspective, I
I
respect that.
requested to change the meetings, and
I would want to hear Frank's perspective before I pass judgment on that, but go
But I
ahead.
requested to alter the meetings, and I was not forthright with it.
Okay, well, everyone was talking, go ahead.
Rick Smith, 156 Forest Street. There was another comment made too just some clarification on this. You mentioned something about a trailer, a construction trailer, and you've been asking for it for what, 18 months?
18 months ago, a little.
You asked for
18
it,
months
though.
ago.
But I mean, is
Yeah.
this a big unit, or is this a small thing? Is this something that you hide somewhere? Because you made a reference that it's been 18 months you've been asking for it. So that would indicate.
It's part of the contract.
But that would indicate that you had been out there. You hadn't gone out there at all, because you would have clearly seen
Yes,
a
I've been out.
construction
I've been
trailer.
out.
So you already knew there was no construction
That's right.
trailer out there. So why would you wait until bring that up in an
Well, no,
open
that's-
meeting tonight?
Because
When that wouldn't be something
you're
where
all
you would
in-
say,
you're all out
can
here
I
looking
speak?
for
Can I
answers."
speak? I'm not looking for an answer, I'm asking a question.
And I'm answering it.
But you're not letting me finish it.
Be my guest.
Thank you. Because most of the time, what I've heard through most of this have been just condescending and pedantic type of answers from that board up there. You bring out and you put something out forward like that saying, we've been asking for this for 18 months. If someone worked for me and I didn't get a response in 18 months, I'd get in my car, drive down, and then come back and say, hey, Chris, there's no trailer out there. I'd like to see a trailer out there. Make sure one's out there. Is that something that you put forth? Is that something that you did? Because that responsibility falls on you as the chairman, or falls on you, Mr. Chavell. Not yet Mr. Bettencourt, because you just arrived. but that would fall on you. If that's something that you want to dismiss somebody from, because there's not a trailer, I think, Chris, you did a great job. You saved us all that money on trailer rental. As well as
No,
it's the
no.
responsibility of the contract.
We're paying for that. It's part of the contract. Anybody else have any?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. You mentioned the Judson Street project. As I understand it, what's the betterment fees gonna be on that? Rough?
We have no idea right now.
What's the total cost of the project and how many houses?
You have that, Chris?
The rough numbers are coming in excess of $8,000.
$8,000 per house?
8 to 9,000, yeah.
What's the average before this?
I mean, I haven't got all the numbers in yet from what I've got. It's, the average, well, it depended on the phase, on the average. The highest one was, contract one, was, Forest Street area and Parkwood Drive and that area, that was 2,900. All the rest were like 2,500, and the old ones were 1,500, but I think most of them were 23, between 2,300 and 2,500.
Depends on the density of the area and the total cost of the project.
As I understand it from what I talked to the people that were doing the work, originally it was set up as gravity, and then it was changed to low pressure, and then it was changed back to gravity. And that the engineering costs were done at least twice, maybe 2.5 times.
Well, one of the reasons it was changed, the superintendent came to us and told us that we didn't have enough money to do gravity. That he wanted to put in the low pressure. And where we didn't have enough money to do it, we consented to that. And then a few months later, he came and told us there was a $4 million surplus.
That's
So
absolutely not true.
we said,
Do we
why?
have notes on this meeting?
I have minutes of the meetings.
It's
moving.
it's not application.
Yeah,
Well, there's no sense arguing.
right, no sense
Those
arguing.
minutes.
So anyways, the betterment fees have gone from 23, whatever, 25, up to 8,000. I was also told that low pressure is no good, but low pressure is going in all over town, everywhere else
Where is low pressure going in?
We're actually putting low pressure in
Individual?
the whole business district in 44, which I think you'd rather put gravity in with the business district. You're gonna get all kinds of a variety of waste streams instead of just normal household waste. And I don't know if it was ever really looked at too much in 44, could have been done by gravity, but that's over a mile in this contract we're doing right now. I mean, we're doing more low pressure in contract 3 than we were gonna do in contract 2.
How many low pressure units are going to be put in?
Well, this is business, so you have some areas where they have enough frontage for 10 businesses, and you have one business, so it depends what's gonna go there in the future, but there's
How many are being put in now?
probably about 30
30.
businesses, there's like 20-something businesses, and
Did you review
6
those,
or 8.
that contract, or those plans?
Those plans were all designed before we got there.
And you haven't reviewed them since you've been here?
You know, we've reviewed as we've gone under construction here, I mean, it's,
Okay.
I mean, that's a low pressure, and that's for businesses. And I think they have a lot of different things in their waste stream, but I don't know. I've looked at them, and you probably could do gravity there, probably could have. I don't know what the numbers would have came out to for costs, but you may have been able to. I mean, you might end up with some very deep cuts, I'm not really sure. I couldn't, off the top of my head, decide something.
So that's something we'll bring up at the progress meeting.
But there's low pressure in, several areas of town.
Now, let me just jump in at this point, okay? Lou, to your point, low pressure at the residential level has only been done when it was absolutely necessary. Like, I have a neighbor across the street from me on Elm Street. He's on the lake, and he's below the road level. he has no choice. He has to have low pressure because he's got to pump back up to the street. But wherever we as a town could sewer without the requirement, you know, the physical requirement for low pressure, we've always sewered gravity. We've never gone low pressure as a choice. You know, when we had gravity or low pressure, we only did it as that was the last resort. I'm not talking commercial, I'm talking residential type of thing. So the amount of residential low pressure systems in town is very, very small.
But you changed, Judson,
Okay.
from gravity to low pressure,
I'll
then
address that.
back to gravity
I'll address that.
at a substantial cost.
Let me address that, Lou, because I'm familiar with the issue that you're bringing up. The original plan from the engineering firm for Judson Street, for River Street, not River Street, but Judson Street, the original plan was for gravity. That was the plan. And as the chairman just mentioned, we got into this with the superintendent, who persuaded us that ought to go from gravity to low pressure. So therefore, the engineering firm, Ty and Bond, was instructed by the superintendent to change the plan to low pressure. Then when the commission became apprised of the deficiencies of the, you know, the problems.
Who did that? You consultant, Frank?
We did that as a group because it became more apparent. We talked to the engineering firm and we became aware.
Mr. Shiva, what would the cost have been, difference between 8,000 and 2,300?
Oh, Lou, the betterment cost is, as John said, is more directly a function of the cost of the sewering in a given area and the number of homes. You divide it up. I mean, if
Well, there's
we're gonna
120 homes on this
I mean,
section.
and
And there was a $4 million savings?
this savings thing is a whole, that's a whole separate thing.
All right, at this point, I would like to ask for an audit,
Go
a
ahead.
real audit of the monies that have been spent, an engineering audit of the monies that have been spent, what's been put into betterment, what hasn't been put into betterment, and the differences in costs of these different plans and the cost for that. Only because, and I know that there's nothing, not casting aspersions on anybody involved in this, but it just looks from the outside. I'm only a small town cop with a limited education, and I don't quote Shakespeare very often, but something's rotten in Denmark here on your finances, because we got a report from almost $2 million, which I know went back down to 1.4 million, to paraphrase Barry Goldwater, $1 million here and $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. You got this situation on Judson Street with $8,000. Some of those people can't pay $8,000 when they expected to pay $2,300. And we've been paying taxes 75% for 21 years.
Do you know what a betterment cost in Taunton, Lou?
I don't live in Taunton.
Well, but you need a comparison, Lou. So let me just make the point.
I'm comparing it to the rest of my town.
Betterment in Taunton
Yeah.
costs $25,000.
Yeah, and you know what a police chief gets in Boston?
Whatever.
What difference does that make?
Right, well, you know that, one of the differences between the low pressure and the gravity, Lou, is the low pressure puts the burden on the homeowner.
I understand
Okay,
that.
that, as far as maintenance costs,
I understand that, but that's a decision that I would like to have made on my own, or at least had some voice in.
we've had
I mean, this-
meetings.
There's people, I don't think it was public knowledge that we paid for engineering 2.5 times.
Well, you really haven't, but that's,
That's not true.
there have been changes, like every contract, you have changes.
Well, anyways, I apologize for taking up your time. I would like to call for an audit. If you don't have the money to do it, then I'll make sure that it gets into a special town meeting. I'll go for the money. I've already contacted some people on prices, but I just want to see if my $8,000, my toilet's going to flush afterwards.
Well, you are well aware that that is not due up front.
I know you, yeah, I understand that, yes.
We try to, well, the town tries to help out the homeowner by putting it over, what, is it 20 years, 25 years?
20.
20 years, yeah.
At 5%.
5%?
Well, it depends on the issue. It'll depend on the bond issue at the time. We had, if I might,
Yeah,
just for a
right.
second, I do have a report of what the betterments were over all the years, going through all the phases. And it started in 1989 at $1,200. Phase 1. Phase 2, 1997 was $1,350. Both of those phases were at 7.5%. Just to give you an idea.
Where
Back
were
then,
they? Do you have the locations?
that was
I think one of them
one was Pleasantfield, I
One was
think.
Pleasantville. That would explain the very low.
Yeah,
And I think the very first one was Route 44.
yeah, I think you're right, Don, would know, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, actually,
sewer
Don,
on
I think Don
44.
paid for his own originally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then we went to phase 3, 1999, that came in at 5%. That was at 2,100. And then phase 4, 2001, okay, it was 5%. That came in at 2,300. Oh, wow. The other figure I should give you too is the count. Why don't I go back to that too, if you want.
Go ahead, be my guest.
Phase 1 was 62. Phase 3, that's when we started to get into houses, neighborhoods. 307 it had here. Phase 4, 225. Then phase 5, which was also at 5%, 286, that went to 2,700. And then phase 6A, 2007, the rate was 5%, 221. The betterment was 2,900 at the time. So that gives you, a snapshot at the percentage and roughly the betterment for the first phases. I think what Mr. Pacheco is talking about is the goal of the town, as you know, was always to sewer as much of the town as you could. You know you're not going to get some streets. We say 100%, it's not going to happen. You got rock ledge and everything else.
We figured if we got about 95%,
We've scored. And I think everybody understands that. And the goal was each phase would be supported by the next group because they knew it was going to come.
which has happened so far.
And that's been the plan. And yet, and there was also the buy-in that the figures would remain as comfortably close as possible, accounting for inflation, et cetera. And as Mr. Pacheco mentioned, you've got 5 phases that hit here, 6 phases really, if you count 6A, that they've been paying for, they being the group that's now going to pay this new phase. So not only have they had to wait, and they've had to incur the costs of septic systems, et cetera, and additional increases, they've had to pay that 75%. And now all of a sudden you come out and you say, we're not going to double it, we're going to triple it. That's a tough one to swallow.
It is.
And that's an entire section of town, South Raynham, where I used to live. It's going to need a very strong explanation as to how we got there and
Well,
why.
One of the reasons for that, Jordan, is the length of time it took us to get it done. Now, when you were selectman, and Marie Smith can attest, being on the board now, and Don when he was on the board, we had a lot of difficulties getting to where we are today. We had to go through an IMA. Taunton fought us tooth and nail on that. We had to go through the DEP. They fought us tooth and nail on that. It took us a long time. Don't forget, that article was passed in '99. It took us a long time to get where we are today. A lot of work, a lot of meetings, a lot of shouting, and construction costs just have gone up. I mean, it's been terrible.
That process for the IMA and the EIR, which is Environmental Impact Report, they put us through a lot. I mean, we spent probably, well, over $500,000. Over $500,000, and that's documented, that we jumped through hoops to get what was originally phase 5, but was divided into phase 5 and 6. That's how we were able to, kind of get past those obstacles. So, I mean, John makes a point. I mean, there were years, I mean, there are people around here who've been through this. I mean, I was on the finance committee when we went through this. It took years to get to that. So that's obviously part of the equation. There's a lot involved, but we really had to get the comprehensive, the CWMP, which was a different thing, the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan in place, which had to be approved by DEP. And to be honest with you, we didn't get a lot of help from some of the representation in Taunton, because it was a Taunton issue, and they drove it. But I don't know, I go back to the point, the issue, maybe I'm being oversimplistic, and, you know, Luke wants, you know, more documentation, which is fine, it's available. This has all been done with the best interest of the town. The reality is that when it costs you to put a mile of pipe in, the cost per house depends on how many houses there are. It's density. That's the driver. It's density. I'd like to hear Chris Gallagher speak to that, because, you know, basically, if you got 100 houses and you got a fixed cost, the cost is divided by 100. If you got a fixed cost and it's 3 houses, it's divided by 3. So that's a major, major factor. I'm not saying it's the only factor, Lou, but it is, it's a factor. When you're out in the hinterlands, and we always said, when we got to South Raynham, and you take Suzanne Drive and River Street, they were never even in the mix. I mean, that was never even part of the original plan. That's why we went back to town meeting to get approval for what, another 2.5, was it? To take it to that next step. And we did it because, what Lou was saying earlier, we did it because they had been paying 75% all those years, and we said, geez, you know, we gotta support it. They've been paying for that amount all those years. But the fact of the matter is the betterment's up, well, I mean, 10, 15 years has passed and the density isn't there. So it's just more costly to run the pipe per house.
You know, if you remember that Phase 5 actually was Phase 5A and B.
That's right.
A was North Raynham, B was South Raynham.
That's right.
And in between the start of Phase 5A and going out to bid on 5B, the state changed their tune. They didn't want us to put sewer in South Raynham because of growth. They went to this 2020 vision, if you remember that.
I
In fact,
clearly
think-
remember it. I was
in
still
fact,
living in South Raynham.
In fact, I think you went to that meeting with us in Lakeville,
I did.
and they threw the hammer at us.
Yep.
And we've been fighting with them ever since. It was a very long, delayed process. Cost us a lot of money to get where we are today. And things are just, some things are just out of our control. You know that.
And I'm not casting any aspersions.
Oh, no,
I'm
I
just saying, by
understand that.
looking at these numbers, there really has to be, for buy-in for South Raynham, for $8,000 potential, there has to be a very detailed explanation of the cost and what the driving factors were to get acceptance. And I think we owe it to the
Yeah,
people in
and-
South Raynham to do that.
That's fine, but I mean, can I just jump
Yeah,
in?
go ahead.
Because, you know, the comment I made earlier, I don't know whether or not that's registering or resonating, but it is a density thing. I mean, you know, so it is what it is. But to get back to Lou's point, you know, the flipping from gravity to low pressure back to gravity, which was something that we had to work out with the superintendent. And the board had a demand that we go back to gravity. And the cost associated that who was you know implying is not a driver in this betterment cost. It's not a driver. There isn't a huge amount of cost that went in terms of changing the plans from gravity to low pressure and then back to gravity as we demanded, because that was the quality system that the town deserved. It's what we did with the rest of the town. And believe me, I can bring consultants here, and I have them on tap, and I'll let them talk to you first-hand experience about the disadvantages to the consumer, to the resident of low-pressure system. I'll bring them in here if that's what you want, because I know who they are, and I have those connections, and they'll tell you about the tremendous disadvantages. I wouldn't have a low-pressure system on my house. I wouldn't want it on your house. And if you want me to go through the litany, I'll take the time right now to start it off, but I'll bring the consultants in. I just want to tell you this. It's not the way to go. I wouldn't approve it.
Well, then why do you have it on 44?
Look, you're talking commercial, Lou.
Well, I'm talking my building is a commercial
Okay,
building too.
that's fine. Commercial, I'll let Chris talk about that, because you know what? That's not something I'm steeped in right now. That's relatively new.
Well, I have a commercial building on
Okay,
that same street.
Well, let's let Chris talk about that, because my proclivity, my preference, my leaning as a commissioner is to go gravity wherever we can, as opposed to low pressure. That's where I'm coming from, because I know the disadvantages of low pressure. But my focus up till now has been low pressure as it relates to residents. That's really where I've been. So, Lou, you're in an area now where I have to defer, because I don't have that, but I know that I don't want to put a grinder system and a big tank in my backyard with a 30-amp service and spend all the thousands of dollars for the electrical work and have that pumping in my backyard and recognize, forget about power failure, you don't have any water in your house with power failure. The least thing that clogs it, you're out of business. You've got a maintenance issue, there's a host of things that the professionals will tell you, you don't want that in your
What do you mean
property.
you don't have water with a power failure?
If there's a power failure in your grinder system in your house, if you got low pressure isn't working, you can't run any water in it. It's not pumping water out of the tank.
No, you can't. But
You
you
have
still
no
have,
water.
you still have water.
You can't,
You can put it in, but you're not gonna get rid of it.
you
No,
can
I didn't
take
know
the
what he
glass
said.
out,
You
but
still
can't
have
put
water. He said
in.
you had no water.
Yeah, well, you can't run the sink and let water go in the drain, so,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, the technology has changed. I'm not gonna argue with that. It's like
Oh,
a
yeah.
Ford or a Chevy. That's neither here nor there. But was everything bedded properly? In the other phases, was money from one phase used in another phase? And then when the music stops, the last people have to pay the price? That's what I wanna know, and that's why I asked that question. Chris, if you could answer the low pressure thing on 44, I'd appreciate it.
I don't, I mean, whenever you can get gravity, you go, generally go for gravity. Low pressure, is done in many towns around here. Whether it would have been wiser to put gravity onto 44, I'd have to look into it, see if it could have
Topography
been
there is
designed that
pretty
way.
tough. The topography there is pretty tough.
The topography on Judson Street was tough. When it changed from gravity to low pressure, I looked at the minutes of the meetings on this, and what happened was, we looked at it, it's an engineering option. You can design things one way and it costs a certain amount of dollars, you can design it another way. You weigh your options on what you want, what the cost is, and is it worth it? The consultant engineer, Ty and Bond, and it's clearly in the minutes, presented the two scenarios to the commission at the time. Presented the betterment schemes with low pressure, the betterment with gravity, and what the cost would be either way. I didn't force anyone to vote as it's depicted here. It's almost like I grabbed you and made you vote for it. It was presented by Ty and Bond, it wasn't even presented by me. And he presented all the numbers, he did all the numbers, Ty and Bond did all the numbers for the costs of all the phases, on whether there was enough to pay for this, enough to pay for that. I didn't do any of the cost estimates. And then it was voted unanimously to have the low pressure system. Then at second thought, when they came back, the commission decided, and it was up to them whether they wanted to change it back, and they voted to change it back and thought that, maybe it is worth the money. They reconsidered it, and that's how we have this design. And that was, it was the commission's vote. The first time, it was the commission's vote. The second time, it was up to them to make that decision, and they decided first, and then after second thought, further review, they decided they'd rather go with gravity, and that's why there was a change order to go with the gravity system.
Let me just jump in, because I just want to say that everything that you just said is highly arguable. And I would be more than willing to debate in more detail what you just said. I don't agree with a thing you just said, personally. Not a thing. So I just want that on the record. There's nothing that you just said about how we went from low pressure to high pressure, back, from gravity to low pressure, back to gravity. That's not the way I saw it. I must have been in a different set of meetings, but that's another
Well,
story.
that's the truth.
Yeah,
Okay,
I-
well,
it's the truth according to your perspective.
All right, we-
It's not the truth
It's
according to
the
my
truth according
perspective.
to the minutes of the meeting.
It's the truth, not according to my perspective.
All right,
I wanna say that.
we can bounce this back and forth, we're not gonna get anywhere tonight. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to bring up?
Just one last thing. At some point, there was a report that the superintendent gave to the board at the request of Mr. Bencourt. And I know there was discussion at the previous meeting. At some point, that report was going to be discussed. I didn't know if it was planned for tonight or at a
Mr.
later
Bencourt.
meeting. I'd defer to Mr. Bencourt on
If Mr. Bencourt wants to discuss it, he's the one that asked for it, be my guest.
Everybody that was there got a copy. I just dispersed it to the commissioners and anybody who was there. I never said I was going to go into detail with his discussion. I just said that Chris said it was all right for me to pass these copies out, which I did. If you've read it and you have a question, I don't know. I don't have it with me right now, so I don't think I could give you a very intelligent response to a question, Gordon. You would have the advantage of being very specific on something, and I'd have to go back and find it.
And I respect that. And so could I ask the chairman then that that be placed as an agenda item for the next meeting?
We could do that.
Great, thank you.
One last thing, could
Before
we
you
get
run
a,
out, I wanna see you about another, nothing to do with this,
Okay.
you'll get a kick out of it.
could we get a copy of the minutes emailed at some convenient time?
Which minutes?
All of them.
Are you requesting copies of the minutes?
The public minutes for your boards that had anything to do with phase 5 and 6.
Secretary.
I don't think so.
No, I.
All right, between you and Chris, because we have had a public request. You're a technical man, Lou. You're
10
not supposed to be
days,
in
10
writing.
days, but I'm not gonna hold you to that.
No, but you were doing it with cable, with people. I personally will accept that. And between our secretary and Chris, they'll dig up the minutes and just be,
Well, it might be easier to copy onto a disk if that's what you.
That's fine.
If you could do it that way, because you can't email folders. You
Yeah.
can only email documents, so you'd be attaching.
And also, as part of this request, I want Ty and Bond to be part of this response because they take minutes and their input is just as important as the minutes which at the time were taken by Chris Gallagher. He was the recording secretary.
Well, I disagree
So-
with that. I mean, I'll take their notes, but I disagree that a public record kept under public law and voted on each week is the same as a couple of engineers telling you what happened. But that's
The
fine.
engineers.
And more importantly, you accept his minutes don't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, and so if you've accepted.
That's all I
his
say. They
minutes,
don't carry the same weight
Right.
legally.
You've accepted his minutes.
Fine, I understand. I just thought you wanted all the information,
Sure.
not just part of it.
And most of the minutes were not taken by Chris, they were taken by John McGarry and Frank Cabral. Frank Cabral's minute, Chris did take some of them.
Yeah.
So that's, various.
Whatever, I
Yeah.
know.
you may be going back into early contracts before Chris was superintendent.
I don't care who is
No,
superintendent.
I-
He's gone.
I understand that,
I'm still on Judson Street.
yeah, and you still don't have sewer.
My father said I'd never get it.
And it's $8,000.
What'd your father say?
Said I'd never get it there.
We'll give you a break, we'll take $5 off the bill.
Do we have any, no, don't make promises you can't keep.
I'll give him $5. That's all I'll give him.
Be my guest. Anybody have anything else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion.
So moved.
And I'll make that unanimous, okay, it's 7:15.